I'd just like to introduce Mahesh Enjeti to you. Mahesh is a colleague and a friend of mine who I met at Western Sydney University, and we've done a few different things together. Like many small, medium business owners, some of us have technical expertise, whether it be in legal or accounting or IT or some area of service that we're good at. Not all of us have expertise in marketing and branding. And as a small business person myself, I wanted to have a chat with Mahesh about some of these issues because his expertise is marketing and branding. And I thought, well, let's have a recording and actually go into it in a bit more depth and capture some of Mahesh's words of wisdom. Mahesh is the co-founder of um, the brandaready.com and also the adjunct fellow of the Western Sydney University. So I'm feeling very privileged to have this opportunity for us to have just a bit of a chat and for Mahesh to share some of his expertise with us. And today we're going to be talking about strategy essentials. As Mahesh rightly points out, we can't really talk about marketing and branding until we have understood strategy. So if I perhaps just ask Mahesh to start with my first question, why do we actually start with strategy?
That's a very good question, Dom. In fact, I would probably ask this question, why strategy in the first place? A lot of people ask me that because we live in such an uncertain, volatile world. Do we need strategy? Because you can't plan for anything. Everything is sort of can change so fast. So I think it's important still to have a strategy that gives you some sense of direction as to where you're going. But let me just answer the question in terms of why is strategy important. Um, I look at strategy a little differently from how others might. Uh, I look at strategy as a bridge that connects opportunities and gaps in the marketplace to the resources and capabilities in the business. And sometimes there are challenges too, not just opportunities. And this bridge could be as narrow as a timber bridge, or it could be an 8-lane highway, depending on the company. Why this definition is more suited, especially to small businesses, because oftentimes we think of strategy as having a vision, a distant target that's probably also a moving target, and then say, okay, where are we today? Where do you want to be? And how do we get there? Now, when we have that vision saying this is where we've got to get, we get so obsessed with that endpoint that sometimes we tend to overlook the opportunities and challenges. And therefore, looking at strategy as a bridge makes it a lot easier for people to be able to sort of work on the here and now rather than on something which is in the distant future. Let me also sort of talk a little more about my view of strategy. This is probably more an Asian sort of approach to strategy. The essence of strategy is sacrifice. Now, the reason why I say that is it's because trade-off is an essential part of strategy. You not only got to know what to do, but also choose what not to do. And I often sort of give this example of a chessboard. Now, the winner is not the one who has more pieces left on the board at the end of the game. You may have fewer pieces, but you have checkmated the opponent's king. And that's what matters, really. So it's you may want to sacrifice your pawn this move so that you can checkmate the opponent's king 5 moves from now. So your ability not to do something is very critical. Oftentimes, small businesses tend to get carried away. They want to do this, they want to do that, they want to do something else because the competition is doing it. And we get caught up in that. As a result, we forget about what is it that we want to achieve. So I think it's always important to remember that sacrifice is an essential component of strategy. Let me try and differentiate good strategy from bad strategy. I've actually borrowed this from someone called Richard Rumelt, who is called, you probably have come across him too. He's called a strategist, and I have a lot of time for him. He's written a couple of books on strategy, probably more. I have two of his books. One is called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. The other is called, I think, The Crux, which is a more recent book. And he says good strategy is about intelligent problem solving that's driven by challenge, and it requires concerted action on various fronts so that You have a direction in mind, and then you have a series of actions that contribute to getting to where you want to go. And I think this aspect of problem solving is often missing in how small businesses define strategy, because you've got to know not only the symptoms of the problem, what is it that you're trying to solve, but also what are the underlying reasons for a problem. And if you don't spend enough time trying to understand what the problem is, then I don't think you can really sort of solve the issues that confront the business. So I think that's something which is very important when you're talking about strategy. The other thing is we also tend to get very, very carried away by goals, audacious goals. And sometimes the big, hairy, audacious goal.
Yeah.
And that becomes the driver for strategy. As a result, we lose sight of, okay, what are those opportunities that we can leverage that are out there in the marketplace? What are the challenges that we need to overcome in order to be able to survive and thrive in this business, in this industry, in this sector? And sometimes I think the annual budgeting exercise becomes the strategy session. It's not. It's only about allocating whatever resources you have across various projects. That's not strategy. The strategy has to have a fundamental problem that you're trying to solve. What is the problem that is confronting your business today? And try and understand the underlying reasons contributing to the problem. Then you have a good strategy. So I think it's important to sort of get some of these fundamentals across right at the beginning.
Yep.
I've seen a lot of literature, especially around big business, where I think you may have come across Byron Sharp's How to Grow Brands.
Yeah.
And a lot of valid insights from the research, which says that brands have to be bigger. Only if they are bigger, if they have a larger market share, can they really grow. The brands can grow only if you have a dominant market share. I think when you come to small businesses, that probably needs to be looked at differently. And this is some research from quite some time ago. I think it's also published in a book. There are a couple of articles in various journals, which says that for small and medium enterprises, for them to grow profitably over a period of time, they need to pursue profits ahead of growth. So it's not so important to grow year after year, but you have to make sure that you also make profits. But if you sort of prioritize growth in sales over profits, you are likely to end up with less growth and less profits, which on the surface might seem counterintuitive, but actually when you look at it a little more closely, if you don't make profits, you don't have a surplus to invest back in the business.
Yeah.
If you invest that surplus back in the business, then you grow. So profits become a driver for growth, and growth in turn becomes a driver for profit. So if you only pursue growth, sort of relegating profits to the background, then you are less likely to grow at the same rate or make as much profit, which I think is, again, a very, very pertinent point for a lot of businesses.
Yeah, and I think anyone who spent any time in corporate would be aware of those meetings where it's all about the big, hairy, audacious goals, as you mentioned, but also the idea is like growth, 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 and not necessarily looking at profitability. And I was wondering, what's the difference between sort of strategy and tactics in your view?
The point that you mentioned, Dom, about big companies, I think, especially listed companies, they're constantly under the pressure from the market, the share market, to show growth quarter after quarter after quarter. In fact, that's how executives are also compensated.
Yeah.
And I think a small businesses can afford that luxury of saying, okay, maybe this year we don't want to grow as much, but we want to make a little more profit, and we want to sort of invest a profit in the business. You have that ability to do that.
Yes.
In larger businesses, especially listed companies, that freedom is not there as much. So I think you've got to be able to leverage that possibility. Yeah, your question about is very valid, very, very pertinent question, because a lot of times when strategies fail, it may not be so much the strategy, but it's the tactics that result in the strategy failing. And that happens mainly because strategy and tactics are not aligned with each other.
Yeah.
Now, the fundamental thing we need to remember is that strategy is about making choices. We said earlier about trade-offs and you've got to sacrifice. Equally, tactics are also about making choices. You got to say, we will do this. We got to go do this promotion against that promotion, or we're going to sort of focus on this market rather than the other market. So both of them are about making choices, and those choices need to be aligned with each other. Now, oftentimes, what happens at companies is the boss sort of formulates the strategy and then comes to the team and says, okay, this is the strategy, go and implement it.
Yeah.
Now, and that looks at strategy and tactics as being sequential steps, but they're not. They need to be sort of evolving in tandem simultaneously. Now, the reason why I say that is because whenever you're coming up with a strategy, whoever it is, you got to think in terms of how is this actually going to play on the ground? Are we able to implement this successfully? If you are not able to do that, then that strategy is not worth paper it's written. Equally, whenever you're sort of implementing a tactic, it's important to take a step back and say, is this tactic on strategy or is it not? If it is not on strategy, ask yourself this hard question. Why are we doing this? Are we doing this just because the competition is doing? Does that sit with our strategy or not? So I think asking these hard questions, both about strategy and tactics, can actually reduce that gap between the two. And the important thing is the strategy must support all the tactics, reinforce all the tactics, and the tactics must also support strategy. More importantly, I think this is where I think a lot of companies tend to, or even small businesses tend to go wrong, is the tactics must support each other too. Sometimes you do one strategy, like you're supposed to be a low-cost producer, but one of your tactics is doing promotion, which probably presents your brand as being something premium.
Yes.
So the tactics are actually working against each other.
Yes.
So it's important not only that tactics support the strategy, but also they support each other.
Yeah.
And finally, I think we talked about this as strategy in response to emerging opportunities and challenges. If we look at strategy as something which is problem solving, then I think automatically it is dynamic, it is evolving, and it is continually changing in response to what's happening in the environment. I often give this example of when I talk about the bridge, the movie Harry Potter, where you have this in Hogwarts school. I don't know if you remember the movie.
Yes.
You have these shifting staircases all the time.
Yes.
So the strategy bridge is like that. It's not so dynamic, but it certainly needs to be flexible enough to be able to sort of respond to challenges and opportunities in the marketplace. So I think spending a bit of time to see how well your tactics are aligned with strategy is good business sense for anyone, including small businesses.
Yeah. So the way you're describing it, would you say that they're kind of iterative, that they sort of bounce off each other back and forth, or is it?
I think so. And because it's an iterative, continual process, you're better able to perceive and discern that gap. If you don't do that, you might sort of go off in one direction and the tactics are not necessarily reflecting that. And then you realize it's too late. But if you do it continually as an iterative process, the risk of deviating or diverging is a lot less.
Yes.
So I think it's a good idea to do it continually. And I think you should review your strategy. In fact, one of the rules of thumb is that depending on how fast your industry or sector is changing, review your strategy twice as often. If it's changing every 3 years, review your strategy 18 months.
Yeah.
And nowadays it's, all the markets, all the sectors are changing so fast that we need to review our strategies regularly. You may not change your overarching direction, but you still may need to change what you will be doing in order to be able to sort of survive and thrive in that environment.
Fantastic. If I could just finish off by thanking you. I mean, there's so many great ideas there, a different perspective with all of your experience and having been involved in your own businesses as well as the teaching you've done. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat to us.
Thank you, Dom, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk to you.